Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of your sources, could be articles, research notes you've gathered, and we really boil it down, extract the key bits of knowledge. Basically, we give you a shortcut to getting properly informed. And today, wow, we are plunging into July 1st, 2025. Just an absolutely wild day. Gave us a real snapshot of, just how complex the world is. So our mission for you today, pull out the main threads. We're talking global politics, economic shifts, cultural moments, and some things that just came out of left field, all converging on this one day. Expect some surprising facts, maybe a little humor where we can find it, because this deep dive is really built around your curiosity. So yeah, let's just jump right in. Okay, kicking things off, let's try and unpack the sheer scale of the global challenges. I mean, it just leaps out from these sources, especially climate and conflict. So July 1st, we saw these just unprecedented heat waves, raging wildfires across Europe, North America. You had Spain and Portugal hitting their hottest June temps ever. France saw its first major forest fires of the season kick off. Italy.
Red alert heat warnings in like almost 24 cities. And Turkey, I mean, over 50,000 people evacuated because of wildfires. That's huge. And it wasn't just Europe. This extreme heat spread right over to North America. Get this, over 3,000 record high temperatures across the U.S. in just the week before July 1st. And Alaska. For the first time ever, Alaska issued a heat advisory. Fairbanks hit 86 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's quite a pattern, isn't it?
It really is. And, you know, what's fascinating or maybe alarming is just how quickly these events seem to be escalating. Scientists, of course, they're pointing straight at the accelerating climate crisis. That's the undeniable cause here. But if you look at the money side, they're a huge reinsurance company, basically insuring the insurers, right? They projected that insured losses from extreme weather could hit something like $145 billion for 2025.
$145 billion.
Yeah, and that's a 6% jump from the year before. It's not just a number, though. It's like it signals this fundamental crack in how financial systems have, traditionally handled climate risk. Insurers are really sounding the alarm, shifting the burden. They're basically forecasting a future where weather costs aren't just like an expense line item, but a systemic threat to economic stability.
That is a chilling forecast on the financial side. But then there's the human cost, which is just profound.
By July 1st, you saw the situation in Tuvalu. Nearly half of their population, that's around 11,000 people total, had applied for visas to permanently move to Australia.
Yes, Lee, half the country.
Yeah.
If you connect that dot to the bigger picture, Australia's agreement, that landmark deal to take 280 climate refugees from Tuvalu each year, it's more than just humanitarian gesture. It's almost like a blueprint, maybe the first real blueprint for what climate migration could look like globally. It forces these huge legal, ethical questions onto the world stage. Sovereignty, shared responsibility.
Yeah.
It really feels like a harbinger of challenges to come.
Yeah.
Big one.
And while all that climate stuff is unfolding, the geopolitical hotspots, they just kept boiling over. Israel, Gaza. On July 1st, Israeli airstrikes hit a seaside cafe in Gaza City. Reports said around 100 Palestinians killed, many civilians, children included. The sources specifically mentioned an artist, Franz Al-Salmi, and a journalist, Ismail Abu Hattab, were among those killed. And separate strikes hit displaced people who were gathering at Al-Aqsa Hospital. It's just
Yeah, deeply concerning.
makes you wonder about the international response, right? It absolutely raises that question, especially when you hear the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights using language like potential ethnic cleansing to describe the campaign. And humanitarian agencies, they're reporting a deepening famine. Infants are particularly affected because aid and food shortages are so severe. So this isn't just about casualty counts anymore. It's a stark warning, really, that the conflict is tipping into this dire humanitarian crisis where basic survival is threatened for, well, an entire population. It forces a reevaluation of international responsibility.
Right. And then, connected to that region, news from Iran. Authorities announced on July 1st that an Israeli strike on Tehran's Evin prison back last month actually resulted in 71 deaths. That included prisoners, guards, civilians. And then, adding to the tension, Iran apparently rebuffed an IAEA inspection, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency. They wanted to inspect nuclear sites that were damaged in reloaded airstrikes, and Iran said no.
Yeah, and that dispute just ratchets up the tension significantly in the Middle East. I mean, Iran sees it as sabotage. Obviously, their refusal of inspections combined with warnings from Israeli and U.S. intelligence saying Iran is advancing its nuclear program.
Yeah.
Well, it creates this immense international pressure. It forces everyone to confront the very real risk of nuclear proliferation in a region that's already incredibly volatile.
Okay, so that's the global picture. Intense. But then you zoom in on the U.S. domestic front, and honestly, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. Just the sheer scale of policy shifts, legal battles, all in one day. Let's start with President Trump's one big, beautiful bill, this huge domestic policy bill. It passed the Senate July 1st. It was after a marathon overnight session, ended up 50-50. Vice President J.D. Vance cast the tie-breaking vote. So what was in it? Roughly $4 trillion in tax cuts, heavily skewed towards the wealthy, elimination of taxes on tips and overtime, and pretty substantial cuts to Medicaid. I mean, those are massive policy changes. What was the projected impact?
Well, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they put out estimates. They figured nearly 12 million Americans would lose health insurance over the next decade because of this. And it was projected to add something like $3.3 trillion to the national debt.
Wow.
Yeah, stark numbers. So proponents, they argue it's about economic freedom stimulating the economy, right? But these projections from a nonpartisan source, they highlight this direct trade-off. You get big tax cuts, but you see significant impacts on public welfare, on the debt. It basically sets the stage for a huge debate about fiscal responsibility and the social safety net for, well, probably generations.
And it's worth noting, 3 Republican senators actually broke ranks. They voted against it. They cited concerns about the impact on their constituents, fiscal responsibility, and the reaction, as you'd expect, was immediate and polarized. Progressive groups slammed it. Trump supporters, business groups, they celebrated as a big win. Okay, shifting to immigration. The Department of Justice issued new directives also on July 1st. These were aimed at stripping naturalized U.S. citizens of their status. The conditions were if they're accused of a crime or sort of vaguely deemed a threat to the country.
Right, and these measures, they immediately set off alarm bells. Immigrant communities, civil rights advocates, serious concerns. The worry isn't just about, individual cases, though that's part of it. It's the potential for a policy like this to destabilize entire communities. It creates this profound sense of precariousness for potentially 25 million naturalized citizens. It could easily chill participation in public life, undermine the whole idea of permanent citizenship being based on, well, shifting political winds.
And then, almost like something out of a movie, President Trump inaugurated Alligator Alcatraz, this remote ICE detention center down in the Florida Everglades. $450 million facility designed for up to 5,000 migrants. It immediately sparked protests. Indigenous groups, environmentalists, they were protesting the location, the lack of environmental review, citing risks like hurricane exposure, ecological damage. And on the same day, large-scale ICE raids were happening out in California's agricultural towns. Reports said many migrant farm workers just fled, leaving fields nearly 70% empty.
Yeah, and these actions, they feed right into the larger debates about immigration enforcement, obviously, but also the economic impacts. Like those raids disrupting planting and harvesting, that's not just a temporary blip. It actually threatens crop yields nationally. It could potentially push food prices up for everyone. It really highlights how these policy choices ripple out into the broader economy, even, down to your grocery bill.
Okay, let's pivot again. Significant Supreme Court news on July 1st. The court agreed to review a case brought by the National Republican Congressional Committee and candidates including J.D. Vance. They're challenging campaign finance laws, specifically the ones restricting coordination between parties and candidates. They're questioning parts of the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971. This feels like a potentially huge case. What's at stake?
Oh, it's definitely huge. The core argument from the Republican side is basically that these coordination bans stifle political speech. They limit how candidates and parties can talk to each other and plan. On the flip side, you have groups like Public Citizen, more aligned with Democrats, arguing that getting rid of these barriers would just open the floodgates to secret billionaire-funded campaign spending. It could totally shift the political landscape. So the real stake, it's the future of campaign finance itself. Is it going to become this free-for-all, unlimited dark money system? Or will regulations keep trying to, level the playing field somewhat? It could fundamentally reshape public trust in elections, change who can even compete effectively. Big implications.
Yeah, definitely want to watch. And just briefly rounding out this segment, the high-profile trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A partial verdict came down July 1st. Guilty on 4 out of 5 counts, but the jury was deadlocked on the most serious charge, racketeering conspiracy. It just keeps that whole conversation about accountability in the entertainment industry going. Okay, so we've hit global crises, major U.S. policy shifts. But what about daily life, the sort of fabric of society? Let's zoom in on some of the more personal, maybe surprising stories from July 1st. First up, there were these planned 4th of July protests called Free America, organized by groups like the Women's March, planned for over 200 locations nationwide. The aim was drawing attention to, well, a range of issues. Economic inequality, civil rights, what they see as eroding democratic norms. The timing right before the holiday was obviously symbolic, and they even planned to fly that iconic Trump baby balloon outside Mar-a-Lago. It's a pretty potent form of dissent, isn't it? July 1st also marked a couple of notable passings. Jimmy Swaggart, the pioneering American televangelist, died at 90. A really complex legacy there. Huge role in shaping modern evangelical media, but also those very public personal failings. And we also got the official cause of death for Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys legend. His passing really brought his genius back into focus, those groundbreaking contributions, the innovative songwriting production, basically defining the whole California sound. Switching to sports. Big surprise at Wimbledon on July 1st. American tennis star Coco Gauff was knocked out in the first round. Her early exit was a major headline, sparked a lot of talk about the pressures on young athletes at that level. Then you had the kickoff of the new-look FIFA Club World Cup, hosted in the U.S. 32 teams, 11 cities. But the early matches were actually hit by thunderstorms and record heat. Play got slowed down because of FIFA's safety rules, raised questions about stadium design, scheduling, especially with the climate changing. And in the esports world, the League of Legends Mid-Season Invitational, MSI 2025, started in Vancouver. They introduced a new fearless draft format, kind of positions Vancouver as a big esports hub. Closer to home for some, severe weather hit the U.S. Northeast on July 1st. Widespread flight cancellations, delays, major hubs like D.C., Philly, New York impacted. Sadly, at least one death reported when an SUV hit a downed tree. It really snarled travel right at the start of the busy 4th of July week. Highlighted, again, how vulnerable our infrastructure is to extreme weather. Down south, in Atlanta, demolition began at the old Atlanta Medical Center site on July 1st. This marks the start of a big, multi-year redevelopment plan, aiming for mixed-use development, affordable housing, public spaces, a really significant urban renewal project for the city. And let's end this section on a cool note. The Telus Science Museum out in Cartersville, Georgia, announced they're planning to display a piece of a meteorite. It streaked across the sky, landed in Georgia in late June. So the public gets this rare chance to see a piece of space rock. Hopefully sparks some interest in astronomy, reminds us there's wonder out there too. So moving beyond the immediate headlines, the human stories, July 1st also gave us a glimpse into these deeper economic currents, shifts in global governance. What were the big structural things happening? Well, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, speaking in Portugal, confirmed U.S. interest rate cuts were on hold. He cited uncertainty from those newly imposed tariffs, emphasized a cautious, data-driven approach. Notably, he pushed back against calls from President Trump for immediate cuts, caused some market volatility. What are the bigger implications of that kind of wobble in the markets?
Well, yeah, postponed rate cuts basically mean borrowing costs stay higher for businesses, for consumers. That can definitely slow down investment spending and the volatility you mentioned. That reflects investor uncertainty. They're nervous about where the economy's heading, especially with tariffs muddying the waters. So it's not just, a blip on the stock market. It's potentially a drag on overall economic growth that could ripple through jobs, consumer confidence, that sort of thing.
Right. And meanwhile, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they released their statement on Bosnia and Herzegovina's economy, also July 1st. They highlighted some resilience, but also pointed to significant risks. Growth was okay, helped by government spending, but rising inflation, political tensions, so those were threatening progress, hampering their EU hopes. Sounds like a bit of a mixed bag, maybe a rocky road ahead for them.
Oh, absolutely. Their path towards joining the EU really depends heavily on stable economics and, crucially, political cohesion. So when the IMF flags rising inflation and political tension as threats, it's not just an economic footnote, it's geopolitical. It means their integration into that bigger European framework is still pretty vulnerable. That could have long-term effects on stability in the region.
Okay, sticking with Europe, but a more positive note, perhaps. A major integration milestone. Bulgaria officially adopted the euro on July 1st. They became the 21st country in the Eurozone, really the culmination of a lot of economic reforms, effort to align their monetary system.
Yeah, for Bulgaria, the promise is, lower interest rates, more investor confidence, smoother trade. That's the upside. But of course, critics point out the downsides: losing control over their own monetary policy, potential inflation risks, the need for strict fiscal discipline that comes with Eurozone membership. It's a big step, reinforces the Eurozone's cohesion, especially after Brexit, but it also means Bulgaria is now fully tied into the shared economic challenges and policies of the whole bloc.
And on the global sports governance stage, a really interesting development. Kirsty Coventry from Zimbabwe formally started her term as president of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, July 1st. Huge milestone. First woman, first African to hold that top job. Seems like a significant push for more inclusivity in how global sports are run.
It really is a big step, symbolically and practically. Her campaign focus was on feminism, diversity, social equity. That sets a clear direction for the IOC. But it's also important to mention there was pushback. Opponents raised concerns about her stance on banning transgender women from female events. So it kind of indicates that while the IOC is embracing diversity in leadership, these really contentious issues around gender participation, they're going to keep grabbing debate and probably reform efforts around Olympic inclusion for, well, likely years to come. It's far from settled.
Yeah, complex issues. And finally, back in the UK, they marked their warmest day of the year so far on July 1st. Hit 34.7 Celsius in London. And on the very same day, Parliament voted to advance proposed reforms to universal credit and personal independence payments, key parts of their welfare system.
Right. The heat obviously amplified worries about public welfare, cooling access, health services, especially for vulnerable people. What's kind of striking is seeing those welfare reforms moving forward right alongside these immediate environmental pressures. It really highlights how governments are trying to balance, or maybe struggling to balance, these immediate climate impacts with longer-term social safety net policies. It's definitely going to shape the political conversation around climate resilience and social protection going forward.
Wow. What an incredible range of stuff we've just walked through.
Yeah.
Global climate crises, huge political moves, cultural moments, personal stories, all unfolding on just one day, July 1st, 2025. Our goal here was really to give you a comprehensive picture, but hopefully digestible, of all these complex, often interconnected events pulled straight from the sources you shared with us.
Yeah, this deep dive into just one day, July 1st, 2025, it really does show how tangled up everything is, doesn't it? And how fast the big picture can change across so many different areas all at once. So the question I leave you with is, looking at all this, what stands out to you as maybe the most significant long-term consequence from this cluster of events? And how might it all shape, the rest of that year?
Lots to think about there. We really hope this deep dive gave you some fresh perspectives, some valuable insights. Thanks so much for joining us. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into your sources.